My next guest is John Friedman, a professor of public policy at Harvard, here to talk about the impacts that effective teachers can have on student, not only academic achievement, but on their lifetime earnings. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
So you were recently involved in a study that looked at how we should be measuring teachers to determine whether they're any good at their jobs, essentially. And this has been a big issue across the country, particularly with the Obama administration, a lot of education reformers pushing for more teacher evaluation systems. And you talk about the importance of the value-added measure in determining how well a teacher is doing. Could you briefly explain what exactly that is for us laymen?
Sure. So there's a lot of complicated statistics that go on behind value added, but it basically boils down to judging teachers based on how their students do on the end of year test, adjusting for differences in the types of students that each teacher has. And I think that's the challenge in value added, is to figure out whether we're accurately adjusting for those differences across students.
Okay, and I know there are some detractors to using this method, and I want to ask you about that. But first, what do you think? Should we be using these value-added measures, and what did your study find?
So what our study found was, first, value-added looks like it accurately separates the impact of the teacher on student test scores from the impacts of other factors like the racial mix of a classroom, or whether students in that classroom came from, say, rich or poor families. If we want to use value added, it's really important that it measures teachers only and is not contaminated by those other factors. So that's a good thing. The second thing we did was to look at whether teachers that raised test scores, i.e. had high value added, also had long-term impacts on students. We want to make sure that teachers aren't just teaching to the test. But we found that teachers with high value added increased the rate at which students attended college. They decreased the rate at which girls had teenage pregnancies, and they also increased the earnings that all these students had later in life. And so it looks like teachers that are high value added really have quite important and large long-term impacts on their students' lives.
So what about the critics of this method? What is their problem with using value-added measures?
Well, I think we've addressed some of the key critiques of value added in that now we have shown that value added is really it's a good measure of a teacher's impact on test scores. It's not contaminated by these other factors. Now, that said, there may be aspects of teacher quality which are not measured well by test scores. And so for that reason, I don't think anybody should be using only these test score-based measures in order to evaluate teachers. I think that it should be a mix of both test score-based measures and then also other qualitative observations like principal classroom observations, peer evaluations, maybe even student evaluations of teachers should all come into play in trying to evaluate the performance of teachers.